Welcome on this. We're now being joined by John Erith, Senior Policy Director for the Center for Arms Control and Non-Proliferation. He's joining us live from Washington, D.C. Welcome to the show, Mr. Erith. Now, the French president, along with the German Chancellor, have said that Ukraine should be allowed to use Western weapons to hit Russian targets, while we witnessed how Putin earlier warned the West, saying that the NATO members were playing with fire with such proposals. How do you see this stance by France and Germany perhaps sparking the rise of a broader conflict?
This is very standard rhetoric from the Russian side. It's been very consistent for the last 2 years that every time there is additional assistance being sent to Ukraine from Western countries, Putin or sometimes Medvedev will say something like this. It's part of a consistent strategy to raise the perception of a threat of a wider conflict and to get the Western countries to self-impose limitations on the assistance that they provide Ukraine.
Mr. Erith, Macron has, of course, distinguished between striking military targets from which Russia is targeting Ukraine and striking military targets otherwise. Now, it's a very fine line. What's to say that Ukraine maintains that line? And if it uses those weapons, targets other military facilities as well, we have an all-out war after that. Is it not playing with fire, as Mr. Putin said?
There is already an all-out war that is underway.
A larger
war
conflict.
That Russia is waging
a larger
on
conflict
Ukraine.
with NATO involvement.
What Russia is asking here is for Ukraine to restrain itself from attacking targets in Russia, while Russia is unrestrained in the targets it can attack in Ukraine. That's not the recipe for a winnable war for Ukraine, and that's what Russia wants.
Mr. Erith, now the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, he made the case for allowing Ukraine to hit military bases a few miles inside Russia when he visited Kiev just a few days ago. However, the White House has now come out with a statement saying that it opposes Ukraine using U.S. weapons against Russia, with consensus around the U.S. policy fraying and pressure also mounting. Do you think that the U.S. will allow Ukraine to use American-made weapons against Russia?
It's a very fine line to walk.
Yes.
On the one hand, nobody in Washington wants a escalated war, wants a wider conflict to emerge. On the other hand, Ukraine has an absolute right to defend itself, and that should be allowed to use all the means at its disposal to do so. But within the framework of international law, which means to strike military targets and not civilian ones.
Mr. Erith, do you feel Ukraine has nothing left to lose at this point, because it is, there are high chances that Ukraine burns its own hands here, given the fact that US does not want an all-out war with Russia, and US is already in a certain amount of conflict with several nations where Russia has built its strong ties in the recent 2 years?
It's a decision that the Ukrainian government and the Ukrainian people are going to have to make. On the one hand, it is tremendously disadvantageous in a military sense for Ukraine to suffer these attacks on its territory coming from Russia without any chance to hit back. On the other hand, Ukraine does not want to escalate and does not want to provoke a wider conflict. So it will be a question of finding a balance. What targets to hit inside Russia that would have the maximum military effect and would in some way inhibit Russia's ability to wage war against Ukraine and the Ukrainian population without going too far and provoking that wider conflict.
All right. Thank you for joining in, John, and sharing all your insights. Of course, that was John Erith joining us from Washington, D.C., sharing all his insights. Always a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you very much.